All of your most paranoid fears are true. And I think it's one of the reasons why we end up behind the curve. Because we are smart, we are beautiful, we are full of energy, we're incredibly creative. When you look at what we accomplish with very little in substance, what we aren't is unified. We are many wonderful people working very hard in small unified groups, but we're not unified en masse. We're not honest always amongst ourselves. Among us, we have disagreed today already a number of times, and that's just natural and human. But somehow, if we are to achieve those goals that we consider most important, be it health for our children, or for safety and security in our own old age, be it the end to the fear of war and human-made disaster, we will have to be organized. And it's kind of like beating us up, which I don't really want to do. If there's anybody in this room whose job it is to get things organized, I figure it's mine, and I'm obviously not doing it very successfully. And I don't know how we do it more successfully. But I think the main reason we have failed, perhaps, is that the problem simply grows faster than we do. We're not really failing, it just looks like it. If the problem stayed static, we'd probably have won many times over and be basking on our collective beaches. It's growing as we sit here, and it's growing. What's that deal? And Charlie, help me. Exponentially. That's it. It's not growing arithmetically. It's growing exponentially, and I don't have an answer for that. I have a lot of questions. I was interested by the question, feminist family values. And so I started by talking to some of my students who choose to work in the Texas Alliance for Human Needs. They're not random, they're committed activists. So I assumed, foolish me, that they were feminists. And do you know, to a one, they said, well, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in everything feminist. I don't understand. I just don't. So there is a problem. We have a problem here in our, somehow, once again, our lingo has been co-opted. This beautiful word that goes back several centuries, that was, at least in theory, conceived as a beautiful thing. The idea of all those things that we think of as good about that part of all humans that is female, because we are a planet that is gender associated. It's a wonder. The reason I love science fiction, and I love it when a good science fiction writer brings me a planet where gender doesn't work the way it does on Earth. But Earth is a planet full of creatures that have gender identities that differ, and it makes all kinds of things happen. And that it's a very beautiful, intriguing kind of phenomenon. And it also makes a heck of a mess when it gets out of balance, and it's clearly out of balance now. And somehow the word that defined the search for balance has been turned against us, and I find that very sad. So I've decided that we need to change the word, and in future we will refer to ourselves with popular words like cheerleaders. Don't you think? Let's become, we know that. Do you know who I think the most popular person in America is? Kathy Lee Gifford. Martha Stewart, there's another one. Now, what are these women if not cheerleaders? And look how they are revered by very good people. So I think we should, or maybe we could become, I don't know, Kathy Lees. We could call ourselves the Kathy Lee movement. I think that there's a...
It's like a Carnival cruise.
Yeah, well, but that's the goal. In fact, where is Genevieve? Genevieve, next year, can we do this on a Carnival line? Why not? And that, of course, is the perniciousness of the other team. The other team not only steals our rhetoric or makes up mean rhetoric, but they've managed to make us look strange and frightening, even to our own children, the activists of today, the young people, and there are loads of them who are not just getting sick at beer parties at night. They're also concerned about cleaning the water and cleaning the air and raising healthy children and coming up with good ways for people to be fed and making sure everyone is sheltered. But they don't like the word feminist. So I think that the poetry and the humor are the only way we're going to get out of this. I don't know if it will be enough to overcome the speed at which this population growth is making our problem stay ahead of us ever more than we can keep up with it.
Hello, hola. My name is Melissa Randall Garcia, and I'm a Cubana Americana. Originally, I'm from Miami, from Little Havana, and currently I'm finishing my master's degree in public policy at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And I'm also the co-chair of the Women's Issues Network there. So when you heard earlier on people cackling about being in that frantic state of finishing your thesis and trying to find a job, as the professor from Southwest Texas was explaining, that was me. When I was asked to be on this panel, I tried to stick to the topic and talk specifically about the challenges that I see that face feminism today. But before that, I think it's very important to also include your personal narrative within your conversation, your dialogue with people. So in terms of myself, I tend to look at my life experiences, all of them, from my family, my education, my career, as one big experiment in feminist pedagogy. Really, it has been. I was raised in a single-parent home and within a large Latino family that was predominantly female. I went to an all-girls high school. I graduated from Sarah Lawrence College, which is a bastion of feminist thought. Yay. And currently I'm at LBJ within a class of 70% women. And I'm in the process, my focus has always been on women in politics there, and I'm in the process of writing my thesis on, guess what? The history of the Mexican feminist movement. So I've been a volunteer always at various feminist organizations anywhere I live, and I worked for a feminist academic journal for a year. And now I work for Latino USA, which is a radio program that is produced here in Austin, that is staffed primarily of women and headed by 2 women. Yeah. And so you can say that I've worked and lived in a variety of feminist camps over the years. And based on my experiences in those camps, I feel that there are particular challenges to feminism here in the US. And I want to keep it within this context, because being that I work studying feminisms from different parts of the world, I want to make it a little less complicated. But in terms of the challenges that I feel that our national movement faces, there are 2 problems I see in particular, problem areas. Number 1, I think, is the ineffectiveness of the movement itself to affect real change within the political realm. And the second issue is the divisiveness and the factiousness of the movement itself. So in terms of number 1, feminism and the political realm, which is obviously an area that I'm particularly concerned with because I'm a student and lover of politics, it seems to me that within the last 10 years or so, there's been a shift in our movement. We are no longer seen as a movement that is a political entity. We are much more of an academic exercise. And that's not to say that academics, including myself, don't have a place in the movement. We enjoy a very important place in the movement. Without academics, we wouldn't be able to have that history of writing that we have. We wouldn't be able to reflect on our situation in the society. And more importantly, academics help us further a larger goal, which is to help educate our youth, to sensitize them to issues, and also to help them become more kinder, gentler citizens for our society. But I think in the end, we've become too one-sided, and there isn't a healthy combination of feminist theorists and feminist practitioners. So to me, what has happened is that we reflect and ponder too much and act too little, which is very true in terms even of the feminist academics that we have right now, tend even to be clustered in certain disciplines. More often than not, feminist academics are in the humanities. There are very few in the social sciences, and even fewer still in the hard sciences. We have an array of feminist theories out there, but sadly there is a dearth of feminists within the social sciences, which is sad for me because it's reflected in my experiences at LBJ. Like I said, I am within a class that is 70% women, and at one point had one of the highest percentages of women of any faculty in public policy schools, but yet we are lucky if we get 1 or 2 courses on gender and how it relates to policy a year. And even within our core courses, it is very difficult for us to talk about how policies are really affected by women and how women affect those policies and how women manage differently. So it's very sad for me. So I think that in the end, it's ironic that the rallying cry for feminism worldwide is the personal is political. But how political in the end is the personal if we rarely study it? So what's happened as a result? I think that we as a movement have become particularly crisis-oriented, i.e. the only time we mobilize politically, or even better, the only time we get attention as a political movement by the powers that be or by the media is during heated debates, abortion, family values, things like that, Roe v. Wade. So I think in the end we need to look beyond the crisis situation and we need to redefine ourselves in order to mobilize another mass movement. We are not a mass movement anymore. And we have to help girls and young women grow up and not have them feel as if they are a part of a generation that is post-feminist, which is happening more often than that. Number 2, I think the factiousness of the movement is also a big concern of mine, being that I am a woman of color. And I think that is true, and even if you look at the history of the movement has always defined itself as being separate. We have become separate of other movements, especially the second wave. We separated ourselves from the leftists and from the civil rights movement. It has particularly been defined by white, middle-class, educated women, and issues of race and class, to a certain extent, have always been subsumed under the larger issue of gender. But I think positively, on a positive note, in the last 10 years, and I think thanks to feminist academics, we've begun to rethink and redefine this universalized concept of sisterhood that we've always wanted to keep to our own. And we've realized the importance of looking at how issues of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, disability are interconnected and work together. And I'm also pleased to say that we have helped give rise to a range of other different types of feminisms within our own feminism. We have women of color who are writing their own books, writing their own stories. But I think the only problem that we face right now is that we may recognize that these issues are important, but this recognition, I think, in the end is done at face value. We may think that they are important, but I think we still work separately, and I think that's the fault of not just the larger movement in itself, but also we, women of color. I think there's a lot of misapprehension. I think there's a lot of miscommunication, and I think that, yes, we need to recognize the fact that we have our own struggles within our larger struggle, but we need to find a common thread. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let me try this again. Good afternoon. Let's wake up the crowd a little bit. My name is Sonia Aillange, and I'm a graduating student at the LBJ School of Public Affairs as well, May 18th, and I'm still jobless. I, along with Melissa, am a co-chair of the Women's Issues Network, and I decided today when I was asked to discuss the challenges of feminism. In my experiences, which have been limited really to the past 2 years with the feminist community, I don't necessarily have any challenges for you because I think the panelists before me and after me will have enough, but I just have a few simple requests. I request that you, as feminists, when you ask different groups or different people to come to your activities, that perhaps you invite one or two of those people to the table. For example, when I was a senior at a college in DC, Howard University in Washington, DC, my sorority was asked to participate in the pro-choice march. Well, that was fine, but when I looked at all the organizers, they were all middle-class white women. Now, that's what I saw. And then they were shocked when there was an, not rebellion, I guess you could say, of African-American women who were, quite frankly, pissed off at how NOW was organized. And I was asked to participate in the demonstration at the pro-march. Now, personally, I didn't deem it appropriate because the purpose of the march was to support abortion rights and not my own personal agenda. But that is something to heed. Also, that when you get the help from people, just remember what your parents taught you about saying please and thank you. Another request I have is that when you address me as an African-American female, and I talk to you and you ask me what my issues are, and I say they are trade and commerce, and I'd like perhaps to work for the White House or for the Department of Commerce, please don't label me as an Oreo. I'm not a sellout. Think of me more as a caramello bar, brown on the outside, sweet on the inside. I can be open to all your ideas, I'm easy to please, and I can help you do whatever you want to do. Those are my basic requests as far as requesting some niceness from the world of feminism. Peace, love, and progress.
My name is Marta Cotera, and I work with the Mexican American Business and Professional Women's Association, which was a departure from more radical, it was a coalition group from more radical activities of the past, civil rights, Raza Unida, et cetera. And we called ourselves 20 years ago Mexican American Business and Professional Women to see if that would make us more appetizing. And to a degree it did, and to a degree I kind of regret it because it also made us a lot safer. And, and sometimes I do a lot of work, one-on-one I do a lot of work. Sometimes I wish that, they'd be more radical. So I find myself striking a lot at times on my own and doing some crazy things on my own. I love the Foundation for Compassionate Society because it fulfills a lot of my needs to do crazy things. And this is one of the crazy things I want to do today. So I love having been invited here. I agree and disagree with family values, kind of sticks in my throat because I think the people that promote the tagline, so to speak, have no earthly idea. I mean, for Reagan to promote family values and then to slash bilingual education, which promotes family connectedness through language and culture, is totally nuts, So I agree and disagree with family values, but dadgummit, I'm not gonna let anybody take my words away. Just like I will not let people take my words, feminist, away from me. I will call myself, as I told the Chicano conference last week, whatever I wanna call myself, And if that's what I wanna call myself, and I wrote a book on the Chicano Feminist, so I can't very well now say, oh, I made a mistake 20 years ago. I'm now Chicano cheerleader. However, it's interesting, since you mentioned the word cheerleader and I didn't, that when you look at, if you will notice some of the Chicano documentaries that have recently emerged on television, keep this in mind because when you look at the political one, they refuse to cover the ideology that Chicanas within the Raza Unida movement developed, and we were the only ones that developed an ideology, and instead they had like 3 interviews with cheerleader types that said, oh, it was very nice, we met lots of people in the movement, and they gave Marta 2 minutes to say, 2 seconds to say, well, we were working on an ideology of family, political feminism, and we could have really worked on that because that's exactly what we did. Enhanced, the value, say that the role of the woman within the culture to include the public sphere, which is exactly what we did. And we developed an ideological base for it. You'll never hear that, I don't think. But you will hear and see the cheerleaders. And unfortunately, you will see in the political documentary a lot of Sissy Farenthold, sorry to say, as a feminist, she betrayed the Chicana caucus. You know, that was just one of those many, many betrayals. I come from a long line of political activism, I just realized, now that I have to recount my history, from civil rights work here in Austin in the early 60s to Chicano movement work, starting an alternative college in the Valley, going to Crystal City with my family to work for 3 years in the Chicano movement with a political takeover, working on foundation or funding of the Raza Unida Party, which finally opened up the Democratic Party, wimpy as it is, and fleshed out the Republicans from the Democratic Party, which they needed to be fleshed out. And founder of many women's organizations and working with many women's issues. I was brought kicking and screaming into the 1976 IWY. By that time, I was totally burned out on the Anglo-feminist movement, but I came in. We organized a 600-strong Chicana contingent on our own, with our own funds. They insisted on putting fees on the women, so none of us paid them, because they wanted a free lunch line, free line. It's a long story. But promised by the leading feminist here in Texas that we would be reimbursed for our cost, since it was our 600 votes that gave us an ERA conference in Texas, because the people they were recruiting were, cheerleader types and wouldn't vote for ERA. And just to tell you one story, once we gave him an ERA conference, when Marta said, I now want you, Sarah Weddington, to give me the $10,000 that I spent on organizing this Chicana contingent to come, they said, we're sorry, but we're giving the money back to the federal government. So I was out $10,000 of my own money in organizing the people to come. And that's just one experience, one instance, one experience where none of that organizing committee would pay for their own pro-ERA conference. We didn't have to have it. They had it. They looked good to the nation. They went out there and sat on, Carter's lap, and I got left with $10,000 of my own money, hard-earned money that I had spent, that I could well have used on other Chicano issues. So that's just one instance. But I don't even want to talk about that, because I don't think that those are feminists. I think those are opportunists. These people, put themselves out there and do not have critical thinking skills, so they do not know that you need to analyze every situation. And I think Sarah Weddington's made some good decisions in her life and in the past, and we owe her a debt of gratitude, but I thought $10,000 was very steep for me, frankly, However, I think that because I really think that we need to do this reapproachment again. We need to be careful as in the past, but I think that because we're fast moving into a global corporate fascist state, and I just finished reading a couple of books on fascism, and it's scary, that we really cannot afford to nitpick. We need to look at the best strategies for working. Women of color have always told the feminist movement that they don't have, the white feminist movement, they don't have to take on all of our issues. Hispanic women, Latino women, I was looking at the latest figures, have 91% involvement in their communities, which is 20-some% higher than any other women in this country, and these college-educated women. Non-college educated Latino women are 81%, involved. Again, a 25% gap between them and the closest women, which are white women. So we're not asking anybody to do our work. What we have asked for the past 20 years, along with Black women and Asian women and Native American women, coalesce. That way, if we coalesce, you know, then we can handle our issues and we can work on mainstream feminist issues. But unfortunately, our calls for coalition development have not been heeded, because when you find yourself with thousands and thousands of women, you know, supporting your movement, it's too, what should I say? It's too, you're too vulnerable to want to claim the credit for all of it. And if we coalesced, the credit would have to be shared with women of color. But I tell you, when I went to the National IWY after giving Texas on our hard-earned money and pro-ERA conference, and Marta Smiley sat in front of me at Schultz's when I was complaining to her bitterly, and she said, Marta, if nobody else will say it, I will say it. You all gave us a pro-ERA conference. I will say it. Okay, so somebody said it. After doing this at IWY to get pro-ERA and other, you know, pro-choice, other wonderful measures, 60-some% of our women that were there naturally were women of color. And so that conference, you know, totally supported the women's agenda. You know, and the other agenda, the very conservative agenda, you know, was not supported. A feminist agenda was supported. So we know it can work. All we need to do is say, okay, we've learned from history. Now let's get on with the job of organizing to protect our communities, to protect our race, to protect our class, and to protect ourselves as women against this fascist move. I asked a nephew of mine to tell me why he went to work for China for a year to set up a factory, and he had a high-tech factory. He had a very weird experiences with the infrastructure over there. And I said, well, Andy, tell me why you think that the United States will always be strong, you know, in terms of having these people come to set up businesses like Samsung here and not go somewhere else. And he said, Martha, it's not people, it's not skills, it's not anything, it's infrastructure. This United States has the best infrastructure in the world, and I'm talking about water, utilities. We're not talking about people. We're talking about things that we paid for. I mean, we paid for. I mean, J.P. Morgan for 19 years of the hardest years in this country and his 22 buddies paid no taxes. You know, we paid for the infrastructure. Now, and that's just physical, now we need to make it work for us, and we need to protect our country and our communities against raiding. So what I'm saying is, you know, looking forward to the fact in anticipating this global corporate fascism that I feel is upon us, I think the only people that can turn that around and at least protect our communities will be the women whenever we make time from washing the dishes. You know, everybody was saying, well, you know, what keeps women from doing more? You know, well, dadgummit, you have to do that second shift, you know. How, you know, we still make the time. We still make the time, but I just need to say, picking up on some of the recommendations put on this table, I think we can move on coalition building. I think we should start with local collectives of people from various organizations that can work together. I think we should be out there in the street corners promoting the development of women, promoting feminism, and that we should do so like a lot of us work with students, to labor, to teachers. Teachers desperately need to be humane persons, you know, let alone feminists. To the high-tech community, to the workers in high-tech, you know, and to other networks that we can talk about feminism too. I think we still, even on a coalition basis, we're very concerned, and I share Mercedes' concern with racism. Okay. With racism and especially in affirmative action, because I'm doing some secondary research studies, and I know that we have heard a great deal with both feminist and non-feminist, you know, not looking to their racist, classist problems. The one thing that I want to say is that we do face a resurgence of civil rights movement in the communities of color, in the Chicano community, and that we unfortunately need to go back and re-educate our community to the legacy of feminist philosophy, ideology that we have, and not to let the people promote cultural nationalism embedded with masculinist theory and machismo, if you will. So we have like double duty to do as feminists of color. Thank you. I can also speak not quite. Cubanas are much better at this.
Hello, you can hear me. My name is Elizabeth Fernie. I'm known as BJ. I am a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. I was one of the founders of the Women's Studies program there 20 years ago. Been laboring in different fields than Marta, whom I've known for a very long time. But I'm also a writer and a filmmaker who I've been working for, doing research on cross-cultural feminist issues for about 35 years. One of the things that has bothered me from the beginning of my working career is a general sort of disdain for the mainstream that I've always felt in feminist circles. I have 3 children, two of my daughters tell me that I am overemphasizing this issue, but I do think that disdain for the mainstream exists, and I'd like to use the 5 minutes that are allotted to me today to talk about the way in which this disdain seems to be evincing itself, especially overseas. I'm concerned with the way that American feminism and American feminists are perceived by women in other parts of the world, especially the area that I know the best, the Middle East. Do we deserve our reputation? If we are into critical thinking, and I think this is a critical time to be for critical thinking, I think we need to discuss it. It's not good. I ask myself this question as I have just returned from 7 months of travel interviewing women for my new book, In Search of Islamic Feminism, which is under contract to Anchor Doubleday. Now, the issue of accessibility arises with this contract because for 5 years I've been resisting writing this book, saying that it should be written by someone from the Middle East, and that many books by women in the Middle East are already in print. And I sent my editor a long list of books that I think are excellent, and she sent back a note and said, these are wonderful books, but there is not one book here that my grandmother could read. So I'm writing it from the point of view of me as vulnerable American feminist interviewing women in Turkey, Palestine, Israel, Kuwait, Egypt, Morocco, Abu Dhabi, and Uzbekistan. Maybe what Middle Eastern women think about us, and the rest of the speech will be what they think about us, may give us some clues about why some of my students don't want to be called feminists, although essentially I think they are working for the same goals as all of us are. Simply put, feminism has a bad reputation in the Middle East. These are the ways people described it to me. Quote, feminism is a lot of talk and no action. This is from elites. Among a group of non-elites, that is, people who worked in beauty salons in Kuwait, they said, feminism, it's like fast food, all flash and no nutrients. Feminism, said a woman in Morocco who had just arranged for the collection of 1 million signatures to send to the king, which prompted him to launch a reform program of family law. Feminism, said this woman, whose name is Latifa, is a Western product. It may mean something to the women in America, but it doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't speak to me at all. Feminism, quote, this is the next one, is designed to destroy femininity. All American feminists talk about is imitating men. If you're so against men in the US, why do you imitate them? I answered, because they have power. And she said to me, well, if you're such a strong feminist, why don't you create your own sources of power? We've been doing that for 2,000 years, but nobody noticed. The next session, American feminists, this is in Egypt. American feminists only represent the rich elites, not poor women. I didn't have much to answer there. I said, well, what are you doing for poor women? That's another story. You can read my book, which I'm struggling with at the moment and won't be out for another year. Then one that surprised me, but maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. American feminists are not religious. They don't care about religion. They make fun of us because we are Muslim or Christian or Jewish. I said, well, but that's not true. Well, yes, it is. They say, all you care about is the veil. You care about the way we dress. You're obsessed with the veil. We're not. We're not in Iran or Saudi Arabia or Algeria where there are problems of forcing people to wear the veil. We're in the other 20 countries that you pay no attention to at all. Is a veil more important to me than a good job and money on the table? Absolutely not. Well, I couldn't think of anything to reply to that except to say that I'm not going to wear a veil. Well, you don't have to. It's someplace else, they said. But the most common criticism, and this is the one that I think can be associated with many of the things that have been said very eloquently by the women who have spoken before me, is that American feminism focuses only on women as lone figures in the landscape and perceives them as individuals, not as members of groups. Of course, what they're saying here is they're speaking about the family, that basic unit within which most of the social action, both just and unjust, both compassionate and cruel, takes place in every society. Quote, this is from Turkey. American feminists want to improve their own individual lot, and they don't care about husbands and kids and old people, unquote. My defense of feminist movements in this pattern is always rejoined by the fact, okay, you do it your way, that's your cultural pattern, we understand that. What has it got you? Equal pay for equal work? No, I say. Well, we have equal pay for equal work. Paid maternity leave? No, I say. 6 months is the average in the Middle East of paid maternity leave. Political and legal power in the top ranks? Well, we're working at that, they said. So are we, they said. So why are you telling us what to do? We have to, I think, examine our own goals and see whether their criticisms are justified or not. Perhaps the answer is to allow that feminist movements may develop differently in different societies, which have different histories and different economic circumstances. One old lady in Kuwait said to me, quote, you take an Arab woman and an American woman and you put them down in the same social and economic circumstances, and guess who will survive? Not the American woman. I said, why? And they said, because the Arab woman is stronger. She has had to struggle all her life, and she's still alive. I answered that we prefer not to suffer just for the sake of suffering, like our mothers and our grandmothers did. I understand, she said, we don't want to either, but we need to figure it out ourselves based on our own experiences, and that is my final point. Often, and I don't mean that all of us are like this, but many American feminists really sincerely believe that we have the best country in the world and the best women's movement in the world, and that may indeed be true, but it is rude and arrogant to suggest that our way is right for everyone. Most of us around the world, including myself, agree that on basic human rights are also women's rights: freedom from poverty, freedom from political and religious oppression, from discrimination based on sex, race, class, or sexual orientation. But how we reach that goal may differ from society to society. My last quote is from Abu Dhabi, quote, give us the courtesy to do our own thing, she said. I guess what we're speaking about is respect for others. And I think this applies not only to Middle Eastern women, but to ourselves. Thank you very much.
It is possible to speak too English, so literal that I offend the silent language of averting eyes. It is possible to crack the air with whipping words that penetrate proud, quiet pockets of denial. So I mutter, mumble, stammer, mutter, mumble, stammer, mutter, mumble, stammer, hoping that your discriminating ears will be deaf to the words so that somehow their intended meanings will enter a realm of acceptance in the stubborn caverns of unslit darkness that I want to illuminate for you and for me. Thank you. My name is Tammy Gomez, and I am a working poet, meaning that I found my voice, finally. I've allowed it to come out of this receptacle, this body that has been through so much, and I proudly do not stand in its way. And that piece that I wrote was something that I scripted when I was dealing with a lot of dysfunctional lack of communication in my family. And I like to read it a lot at the beginnings of my presentations because it reminds me of where I came, from where I came. Specifically, I'm thinking now of my resistance to speak aloud the truths and the wisdoms that I have come to know and to trust and value the wisdom of my own knowing. And I have, in the many years now that I've been presenting my poetry and other thoughtful words to many kinds of audiences, come to value and respect the inner knowing and wisdom of all of us. And now I have moved on from just being a lone speaker at a microphone, at poetry readings and events, to doing community media work, specifically with Co-op Radio here in Austin, which is, as you may well know, a cooperatively owned and run community radio station. And that is my solution, one of the solutions or avenues of hope that I want to offer to women who live in this community, many of whom I know or have worked with, many of you who have been guests on radio shows we've conducted. And we need not feel that with these two panel presentations this afternoon and on through this evening, when we hear the keynote addresses by the special women who have come to Austin today to speak with us and to us, feel that this is the only time to share and to hear and to speak. There are media outlets in this community that are around to serve you, and I exhort you and invite you with deep respect to come and participate in our programming. I feel that I've come to recognize some challenges to feminism in this community that I think a lot of the other women here have addressed, a kind of anti-coalition sentiment, which may be an inadvertent and in some cases may be deliberate, and I'm not one to judge or decide that for all of us. But I think it's important to recognize that there are forces, some of them maybe trickle down from a patriarchal system which penetrates Austin. Yes, it does. And maybe it's some of our own doing here in the community to act against each other, or at least wholeheartedly not with each other. And I think that is something that is regrettable. I think that there's a lot of internalized racism, classism, and maybe even sexism in terms of homophobic sentiments that even the most outspoken and resilient, stalwart defendants of feminism have inside. We have to address, and we have to recognize. I'm going to stop and break for a poem. I like to do that. I heard it was homicide on the homie side of town. That's East Austin to you. But look around, it doesn't really sound so implausible. 3 ingredients made it all possible. You got a stereo, you got a woman, you got a fist. Bert had all 3 and found a reason to get pissed. I read in the papers how Bert made her hurt multiple blows on multiple nights, and the quote from her said that she'd said, "I don't know how many times my head flew from left to right, right to left, left to right, against the wall." But you know, she finally rose up and used a knife on his face, 'cause it was either hit or run, stand or cower, shrink or rise. Yes, she rose up and showed him her self-defending power, but not enough. 'Cause I heard it was manslaughter, man's laughter in the distance. Huh, one less bitch in my life, one more stat on the files. And you know, she did not call the police department, didn't dial 911 to call the police department, because she thought the cops would come and carry her out of her apartment and carry her away to jail for putting in the mail the money for her several outstanding traffic tickets. Truth. And the Austin American states that Bert's a villain. We believe that. But others who talk, and they do talk, and we know that kind of talk, they believe that she triggered the killing, because a good girl, a good wife doesn't get all uptight, raising fists to fight. But hey, think about it. They were both doomed to lose, him and her, she or him, because neither of them were white. I heard it was manslaughter, man's laughter in the distance. Huh, one less bitch in my life, one more stat on the files. But you know, I put some thought into this, and I believe that it was history that subdued this woman into silence. We know how rarely cops, even good old Austin APD, will give less protection from the violence against black victims. She was black, and so she flinched, thinking maybe she'd get lynched. In trouble for a lesser crime, like speeding, she thought she'd have to do a little time, like years, even as her man, Bert, beat and beat and beat and beat her. Better that her man than the cops mistreat her. I heard it was manslaughter, man's laughter in the distance. Huh, one less bitch in my life, one more stat on the files. I heard it was manslaughter, man's laughter in the distance. Huh, one less bitch in my life, one more body on the pile. We have to look at the systems and the institutions in place that degrade our trying to unite and coalesce. Those institutions are racist, classist, and sexist in nature. Women support them or are in collusion with them as much as men. We have to acknowledge when some of that penetrates and exists in us. We have to acknowledge that. Excise it, work with it, do your Taoist Tai Chi internal breathing techniques, speak with others, whatever we can do, we have to do. Listen to others, and when you feel the pain of your own internalized isms and the pain of seeing what those isms and oppressions do to others, sit with that pain, know it, and from that the flower will bloom. There is hope there. Hope and a solution can spring from there. Thank you very much.
Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Well, my last meeting was with the military Air Force base in Kelly, the Pentagon, and the community, and I tell you, I'm more frightened this time. Well, the speakers have been just overwhelming. I want to thank the organizers, and just to say I'm a health economist, I work with the foundation, and I'm a resident alien, which I didn't dare say at the last meeting. And I'm also of Maltese, which is mostly Arabic background. I'm really pleased with the inclusionary definitions of feminism that have come up today. I've never called myself a feminist because of some of the reasons that Elizabeth B.J. Fernier outlined. I always felt I was too feminine and too family-focused. Because what matters to me most is my family, my children, my love partner, my mother, my father, my hundreds of cousins, and all the plants and animals. Because if we have the true definition of family, the biological definition is the whole community of life, the plants and animals too. My other identity in Kyle, where I live, is the Lehigh lady. My son told me the other day that in school now they all call me the Lehigh lady because together with other residents, and we called ourselves residents, not citizens, because I'm an alien. We're really concerned about, and I think you all should be in Austin too, because you all live downwind, the emissions from Texas Lehigh cement kiln, which was given a permit to burn tires and began burning tires on January the 24th, and also burns coal, refinery catalyst, waste rags, oil, you name it. Hazardous waste is gravitating down to the least regulated industries, and the cement kilns are less regulated than your commercial incinerators. And so they actually are causing increased mortality. But the particulates, the lead, the arsenic, the benzene, these toxic emissions are molesting our children. And this isn't a rabid feminist that is saying, using those words, making the analogy between military industrial polluters and child molesters. It's some even Republican environmentalists. Because what do toxic emissions do? They retard and dull the mental sagacity of our offspring. They cause unusual anxieties and hyperactivities amongst children. Increased juvenile violence has been recently linked to lead emissions. They retard the immune system, compromise the immune system. They change normal hormonal development and functioning. And there are 3,000 children within 2 miles of that plant. And they reduce the sperm count and the ability to have healthy children. So I do ask you all to be aware of the most polluting industry in this area, which is Texas Lehigh, and join us on May the 23rd when we're going to be presented with another whitewash study by the TNRCC.
Is this in Tarrytown?
No, it's in Buda. It's just off, if you come off I-35 in Buda, it's actually at the school where my daughter is, junior high. It's Barton Junior High, and you come off I-35 and go down Farm Road 2770, and it's on 7 o'clock on May the 23rd. And Southwest Texas State University has also been involved in the whitewash and engaged their new environmental institute, which is totally financed by polluting industries like Formosa Plastics, Exxon, etc. I think that feminists, I submit to you that feminists should realize that we have no immunity without community action. The other work that I'm doing is on the military contamination, and I do believe that the military is the biggest polluter. Just north of Kelly Air Force Base, there's a Committee for Environmental Justice Action, CEJA. It's full of really wonderful, courageous, persistent people, and most of them are really sick. I was interviewing Mrs. Gutierrez. She's dying of kidney cancer. Her husband is dying of leukemia. And it was after we'd knocked at her door 6 times that they let us in, and the jet fuel tanks are just about 200 yards away from where she and her family lived, where she's raised, I think it was about 7 children, and she has 19 grandchildren. And each of them came in as I interviewed her and hugged her and kissed her. It was. So we are looking for volunteers to help us with that community health study, and for you all to be aware of the big struggle just around Kelly Air Force Base. They have millions of dollars to clean up the base and the surrounding neighborhood. But instead of doing what the community wants and doing very basic things like a $20 soil sample to see if there's lead in the soil where the children are playing. They're having these highfalutin plans where they bring down contractors from Oak Ridge and spend millions on these new techniques to decontaminate the soil with radio waves. And so it's making, how can we make these people accountable? How can we prove that the health of the neighborhood is compromised by their contaminants, by the shallow groundwater being totally contaminated with benzene, chlorobenzene, perchlorobenzene, TCEs. They admit that, but then they say, oh, well, that doesn't reach the people 25 feet above. You know, there's all these layers of denial going on. There's this seam of toxic waste that they admit to, and this seam is somehow separated from everything else, and it's not spreading anywhere. It's not getting down to the Edwards Aquifer. It's not getting up. And so it's something that feminists, I think, should be very aware of, and I'd like for you to all support the Community Environmental Justice Action and just listen while I read out the demands of the mostly women activists there. Safe drinking water, emergency evacuation plans. The jet fuel tanks, as I said, are only a few hundred yards from where they all live, and they've been fired on by gang flying bullets quite often. And there have been spills. There was a spill just a week ago. Jet fuel has lead in it. It's not like other gasoline. So it's actually of more toxic, has more toxic effects than even the tank farm that was closed down through the actions of Cotera and the community 5 years ago. Immediate cleanup of the soil and groundwater and air contamination, compensation for lost property values, compensation for health damages, free medical assistance to victims, and a green buffer zone between Kelly Air Force Base and the community. Well, if I've taken 2 minutes to get this far, the US has spent $2.5 million on the military and military in production in that time. And this is over 70% of the total world expenditure. And this goes both on war games, like the ones that you heard about this morning where 2 Marines were killed, and on actual wars. And the latest war that the US was intricately involved in and has given millions of dollars, of your dollars, to mount was the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And I'd just like to read the latest information I have from the Washington Post on one day in that war. I couldn't count the bodies, Michael Lindvall, a UN official who visited the refugee compound shortly after the attack, said to an interviewer. There were babies without heads. There were people without arms and legs. And it was the Apache helicopters that were bombing that day. Israel has pounded towns and villages with 3,000 to 4,000 artillery shells and 50 to 100 airstrikes a day, according to UN estimates. There are over 500,000 people now from South Lebanon, civilians, innocent people, mostly women and children, who have no homes and no livelihoods. So I'm asking you all to please give as much as you can to save Lebanon. It's a non-profit, non-governmental and organization based in Washington, and I'm on the board of it, and I can assure you that all the money will go to those in need. I think when we talk about the military, when we talk about the US today, we have to talk about the military-industrial complex. And if we look just on our doorsteps, we can see the waste, the contamination, the fact that the resources are used for this destroy and penetrate enterprise for destruction, which could be used for creative, productive purposes. It causes inflation, unemployment, and a cult of violence. The violence that we experience in our homes, I think, is directly related to the fact that the economy, the US economy, the leading world economy, is based on violence. And our children today are being conditioned to kill. They're being conditioned to be indifferent to killing and to be part of killing. And I have a daughter and a son, and I can see it. I mean, I'm continually trying to unteach them these things with the video games and the Mortal Kombats and you name it, it's there, conditioning to kill. But when you go out of the US and you see what happens, what the US military can get away with, my grandfather was sitting on his porch and he was attacked by a US Marine and he was never the same again. He could never remember anything but when he was from 9 to 11 years old after that, and he talked about that the whole time. It was really interesting, and what happened to that US Marine? Nothing. He just got back on his ship and came home. And what happened to those US Marines that killed prostitutes in the Maltese Islands? Nothing. And so the lack of accountability, the irresponsibility and the arrogance has to stop. About 7 years ago, we started in the Mediterranean to get together as women. And now we have an association of women of the Mediterranean region, and we are meeting in June. And I'm not doing it on my own. I was at the beginning, and it's just great. We're meeting in Cyprus. The women in Cyprus are calling a conference on immigrants and refugees in the Mediterranean. So I want to end just with our main demand, which I hope that would become a main demand of the women's movement in the US, because it is a main demand of most women in the world, and that is that we unite and denuclearize and demilitarize this planet. Thank you very much.